And we're back again with the Pop Culture Cosmos. My name is Gerald Glasser from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. We truly want to thank you for listening and hanging out with us here on the show. Well, one of the things I want to do as far as pop culture is concerned, we always talk about movies and television and board games and video games and all that great stuff during the course of the year. But one of the things we like to focus on every now and then is the collectibles market. And something actually a long time ago, way back in many a decade ago, I was heavily involved in the sports card trading market. I have a collection still today that is probably not as worth as much as I would like it to be, but hey, I gave it a try, and in fact, the mood hit me that I might want to get back into sports card trading. And I know there's a lot of other people out there as well that want to get into it, but they're kind of curious or they're kind of hesitant because they're not sure where to dip their toe in the water. Well, here to help me with that and help everybody out there as well is a guest that I'm just so glad to have finally come onto our program. He is the host of That Sports Card Show podcast. It is available now on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. You got to listen to it today in regards to hearing everything about the sports card market. It is Vince Attulo. Did I get that correct?
You got it right, and I'm going to tell you, nobody ever gets it right.
Oh, well, I've been practicing before we came on, so I appreciate it. Again, it is Vince Attulo, host. It's just so great to have you a part of the show, and I'm so glad to have you here. How's it going today?
It's going great, and I really appreciate you having me on here. This is kind of fun.
It is indeed for me as well a great treat because, like I said, I was heavily back into in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was heavily into sports card trading. Hoops had just come out as far as from a basketball sense. I was getting really involved there. Obviously, Topps as far as not only from a basketball sense, but also primarily as a baseball sense as far as baseball card trading and things of that nature, Upper Deck and Donruss and all that. Mm-hmm. There's so many names then as there is now as far as the marketplace is concerned. So the first thing I ask you is point blank. For anybody out there that is interested in maybe delving back into it, is it a good time to get back into sports card trading?
It is probably as good of a time now as any time that it has been within the last 15, since I'd say the late 90s. We'll call it the post-junk era. The junk era was people debate on it, but mainly it's considered the era between 1986 and 1993. That was when there was mass overproduction in the baseball card market.
Just about the time I was actually trading cards at that point.
Well, that's what everybody says. When you talk to people, they're like, "Oh, I've got all these old baseball cards." Oh, really? What year are they? Oh, they're 87 through 93. I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. And it seems like when you go to like a Goodwill or a flea market and you find baseball cards, that's what they're always are going to be. They're never 1952 Bowman. They're always 1987 Topps. But anyways, that's because they were so overproduced during that era. And now people thought that they would be worth a lot. And, they were just so overproduced. They're not worth much. There are exceptions to that rule. And a lot of people who are fans of that era are kind of getting back into it now. And they still have some of those cards. And there's a couple grading services that grade cards, and some of those old cards that made during the junk era, if you got them in pristine condition and they grade really high, you know how grading services grade coins and comic books and things like that. Well, they also you can have that done with sports cards and trading cards, and you can still get some value out of those junk era cards if they're in immaculate shape and they're the right players. So even with that, you can still get some value. But as for right now, there's a lot of places you can get cards now. You can get them at the retail places. You can get them all over online, but there's not many hobby shops left. I'm sure when you were collecting, you probably went to a hobby shop or a sports card store in that era.
At that, many of them. Plus, also as well, I actually used to deal a little bit when I was at going to shows and conventions. I actually did a couple tables at one point in time. I had a little bit of a stockpile, obviously not by any large stretch of imagination, but like anybody, like the dealers you see now these days that have amassed quite a few. But back then, like you said, in that era, there were a lot of individuals such as myself who were novices actually trying to get into it. They bought cases and cases of supplies of cards, yes, which, as you indicated, are not exactly worth the highest amount right now.
Right. Well, during that era, that's when the hobby was at its kind of its highest peak. But like I say, due to overproduction, which I think they've kind of learned their lesson. Well, that's people debate on whether they actually have or not, but they have lower print runs now than what they had then. And actually, if you are still into that, cards from that era, there's plenty of cases and boxes that still have never been opened from that era. You can still get at very good prices because they were so overproduced. They're still available.
So I see on eBay and other also great places to go as far as for looking for at least value as far as what sports cards are trading at. You do see that all the time as far as ads for that era. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Vince, once again, I am on with Vince Autullo. He is the host of That Sports Card Show podcast. You got to check it out today on Stitcher and also as well Apple Podcasts. I've been listening to it. It's a great show, and I'm going to have him explain why later in the broadcast. But I want to ask you, what sport should people actually start to lean on first if they're just coming back into it or if they're just delving into it for the first time?
Well, that depends on what they're collecting for. Now, if they're collecting for investment purposes, if they've got some cash they want to invest in sports cards because they're going to speculate that they're going to increase in value over time, my advice is to buy the highest graded vintage cards that you can. When I say vintage, I mean like the golden era of baseball, the Mickey Mantles, the Babe Ruths, the Roberto Clementes, those kind of cards. The big names, the classic names. You get those kind of cards, and that's a pretty safe investment. They are not going to decline in value because I don't think they have over the past 30 years. They've always went up. Usually, well, anyways, like I said, that's the advice I give is the highest graded vintage that you can afford. That's where I would start if you're looking for investment. But if you're doing it for fun, what I recommend is collect what you love, collect what you like. I personally collect, I'm from Ohio, so I collect a lot of Ohio teams. Like I had a little pet collection project this year. I got signature cards of all the Cincinnati Bengals rookies. Right. So all the Bengals rookies that they had this year, I've got signature cards of all of them. A couple of them multiple, because they had some pretty nice players this year in the draft. But like, that's just my thing. Now, me doing that, I don't care if they accrue value or not, because it's something I like. It's always going to be kind of valuable to me. Now, let's see. If somebody is getting into the hobby now, let's say you've got a kid playing baseball and you want to teach him the current players, like see who the current stars of the game are. Baseball cards are a great way to do it. You can show them the positions they play. You can read the statistics on the back of the cards or their batting average. You can explain what those all mean. They can trade them with their friends. Although some of the cards now, it's a different ball game with the cards now than like when you were younger and when we were younger. They have like value added stuff with the cards. They come autographed by the players. They come with pieces of the jersey in them. They're very low numbered. They come serial numbered now down to one of ones, which are one of a kind cards. And like the shorter the print runs on these serial numbers, the more valuable the cards are. So you can get into some pretty valuable cards. And trust me, they're boxes right now. You can get boxes of cards now. Topps just had, it was their second year for releasing it this year, the Topps Transcendent. They were about $25,000 a box. Can you believe that?
My goodness, that's a pricey thing indeed, but that's definitely a very encouraging for those wanting to step into actually the realm of sports card trading. That's some very pointed advice right there. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you real quick as well is we talked about sports cards and whatnot being a great way to get back in and also share knowledge of players, not only from the past, but the present as well. But one thing I've seen at card shows both, I'm talking recently, but also in the past as well, when I was a part of them in a more vested fashion, was non-sports cards always trying to loom in a little bit, not obviously trying to overtake, but loom in on that space as well. And with pop culture now being something that's very prominent and out front with it, with our society and our culture today, is non-sports cards still a thing that you think people might have some interest in? I know Star Wars cards, I think, are probably the one that they're talked about the most, but I know there's other non-sports cards that may be of interest to people. And I'm not talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh or the playing cards as far as those games. That's a different thing entirely. And those,
Yes.
Depending on that market, that's a, could be a very pricey thing. But non-sports cards that just celebrate things that are that we love about pop culture, is that still something that may be offshoot, or is that something that maybe people can try and get themselves into before they go into a sports card trading hobby per se?
I love non-sports cards. Personally, I have a personal like side collection that I'm into right now. I collect the 1978 Kiss, the rock band Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own trading cards like Series 1 and Series 2. They were come out in 1978. They were Donruss. There's 66 cards in each set. I'm collecting very like mint or near mint versions of those cards graded. I'm trying to get the whole set. It's going to take me a long time, but that's just like a pet project of mine. Actually,
I know I've had Star Wars, and I've also had those rock cards, which also came out during that era, the junk era that you were stating as well.
Because the non-sports cards, that's what initially got me into collecting when I was a kid. That's what I liked. I didn't like the sports cards. I was into the Star Wars. I was heavily into the Star Wars. Grease. Do you remember the movie Grease?
Yep.
I mean, it sounds funny now, but I loved those cards. And then it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Mork and Mindy, Kiss cards. I mean, I was really into that. And then I got a little older and I got into sports, and I quit collecting the non-sports stuff so much, and I really got into the sports side of things. But now, current day with the non-sports, it's as big as ever, if not bigger than ever. There with the Star Wars, seems like there's a new Star Wars release about every month, if not every week. The Topps has that license, and they release some great Star Wars products. I mean, there's some fantastic Star Wars products on the market today that are a great value. I mean, you can get some really high value stuff out of those. And also, Upper Deck has the Marvel license, and they've got a nice set coming out, I believe, in May. The Black Panther. They've got Black Panther set. That's kind of a highly anticipated set.
And with the Avengers Infinity War coming out, that's going to make them even more enticing.
Exactly. And there are a couple of the smaller cards that are always coming out, the smaller companies that are always coming out with non-sport releases, like Doctor Who. A friend of mine who's an artist just did a bunch of artwork for the Mystery Science Theater 3000 release. I believe that was a Rittenhouse release. I'm not sure on that. But yeah, the shows like the superhero shows on TV, like Arrow, The Flash, all them, they all have their own releases with pieces of wardrobe that the people have actually worn on the show, built in the cards, different cast members, autographed cards, things like that really add value to the product and make them highly collectible. People love them. I like them.
Oh, that's great news indeed for those of us in pop culture that might be a little bit hesitant, like you said, at one time to get into the sports card realm, but would like to go ahead and start trading cards. So that is a positive sign that part of the marketplace is now bigger than ever as far as that's concerned, but also a great way to ease into the sports card realm as well. So that's awesome indeed. Actually two last questions I have for you. I want to hear your thoughts one last time on some final advice on if somebody's actually stepping into it. What final advice do you give them? Or if they're actually maybe already got into it and they're looking for help as far as for a final bit of advice on sports card trading.
Advice in sports card trading. Let's see. I would just look at like what would I have wanted somebody to tell me when I was first starting to get in the sports cards. Because I was kind of like you. I was kind of out of it a little bit in the 90s, and I kind of just slowly got back into it during the 2000s. And now I'm in it pretty heavy with the podcast and everything. But do your research on what you want to get into and what you want to do. It's easier than ever to do research on cards now. I mean, between all of the Facebook groups, Twitter, all the major card companies, and all the grading companies, and just assorted people on Twitter that be glad to help you. Don't jump into a bunch of purchases until you've priced what you're thinking about buying. Check eBay. You can check eBay to make sure you're not paying, an exorbitant amount for a card. I mean, I'm not talking about $5 or $10, but some people get ripped off. Say, spend $100 on a $20 card. That's not what you want to do. So you can check the prices on eBay to check and see what cards like the one you're looking at have sold for. So that's kind of a guide, a way to do research. And take your time with it. Don't rush into buying anything. And like right now, a lot of people buy and sell stuff not only on eBay, but they'll do trades, and in the Facebook groups and on Twitter, they'll just buy directly from person to person. And obviously, if you do that, you want to know the person that you're dealing with, because, it's with anything. You don't know, if you don't know who you're dealing with, you're sending money to somebody. You don't know if you're ever going to get that card sent to you in return. So that's, just an obvious thing. But, yeah, just do your research mainly.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. Before I let you go, you got to tell me about your awesome podcast. Like I said, I've been listening to it, but you need to tell everyone out there that's listening to us here why That Sports Card Show podcast is the place to go for everything sports cards and major collectibles.
Well, I tried to make my podcast like the podcasts that I like to listen to. And the podcasts that I like to listen to just basically have a conversation between not too many people, but usually just like a one-to-one conversation where you can kind of really get in depth on topics, where you can really get into things and get the who, the what, the where, the why, and the how to, and you really kind of get to know somebody. Our shows are usually about between 40 minutes and an hour. And we won't just talk about sports cards. We'll talk about just anything that is going on with the person. Like our most recent podcast, we had producer and director Stu Stone on. And Stu has a documentary he has just completed called Jack of All Trades that is about the sports card industry during the junk era we've been talking about. And it's about because his dad at the time was one of the biggest sports card hobby shops operators that was in Canada at the time. He had I think he said 11 different stores. And he started from one store, and within 3 years, he had 11 stores open up. And that's how big it exploded all at once. But he goes into just everything in his documentary about the sports card industry and what happened to it. And then it kind of takes a turn, like a personal turn between him and his dad. But that's just the last guest we've had. We've had a couple other people on who've talked about their days in collecting, like Slim Jim Phantom, the drummer from the Stray Cats, Danny Boy O'Connor from the House of Pain, the Jump Around song. We've had assorted athletes, and we had Dan Severn on talk about collecting, and whoever, not just celebrities or sports people, just be the guy next door.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
Just try to have an interesting conversation is what we're trying to do.
Oh, that's awesome indeed. Just great. It is a great show indeed. Once again, it's That Sports Card Show podcast. You can catch it today on Apple Podcasts and also Stitcher as well. If you are, any and all, if you have any inclination at all into getting into the sports card or non-sports card market as far as trading, buying, investing, it's a cannot miss podcast. And also, if you're just interested in learning more about the sports card world, you got to listen to it. It's just an awesome show indeed. Vince, it's been so great having you on. Vince, it's been so great having you on the podcast We truly appreciate you taking the time to talking to us here about some great sports card action. And my best to you and the show. And you're always welcome to return to us right here at the Pop Culture Cosmos.
Well, I've had a lot of fun here on the Pop Culture Cosmos, and I would like to come back maybe someday.
Absolutely, whenever you like. You're always invited, and you're always a welcome guest. Because again, it's always been so great to have you here at the Pop Culture Cosmos.